The school bell echoed through the vast halls of the Intergalactic Academy, signaling the start of a new semester. It was the beginning of another year at the prestigious Academy of Galactic Leaders, a school known for producing some of the greatest warriors, diplomats, and strategists in the galaxy. Students from all across the universe, from countless alien species, gathered in this high-tech learning center, ready to forge their futures. Humans, for the most part, were considered new to the scene, their species still proving themselves after decades of intergalactic war and peace negotiations. Among these students, one figure stood out, Alex. He was just another young human, nervous and eager to prove his worth in a world that was so different from Earth. This academy was a place where races with centuries of technological advancement would study side by side, all learning to coexist in the vast reaches of space. But for Alex, it was a challenge. Though humans were respected in the galaxy, they were still seen as newcomers, often looked down upon by the more advanced species that called this place home. Alex had spent years dreaming of this moment, of standing among some of the greatest minds and warriors the galaxy had ever known. But now that he was here, those dreams felt distant, overshadowed by the reality of being just another face in a crowd of thousands. The Academy's halls were lined with floating holographic screens, displaying all sorts of information, from intergalactic news to class schedules, each one more advanced than anything Alex had seen back home. The walls themselves shimmered with technology, bending light and sound in ways that were still beyond his understanding. He had barely taken his first few steps inside the academy when he noticed someone, who caught his attention. It wasn't the flashy alien warriors or the imposing figures of high-ranking students. It was a girl, standing quietly in the corner of the bustling hallway, looking out of place despite the bustling crowd around her. She was an alien, but unlike the others. Her skin was pale blue, her eyes larger than a human's, with an unsettlingly quiet gaze. Her name was Lyra, and unlike the majority of students, she didn't seem to fit in. She wasn't with any of the groups, she wasn't laughing or speaking in the way the other students were. Lyra always seemed to be standing on the outskirts, watching the world pass by, never quite becoming part of it. Alex couldn't help but notice how out of place she seemed. While other students greeted each other excitedly, talking about their experiences from the summer or discussing the latest tech upgrades, Lyra stood silently, her head down, clearly avoiding any form of attention. It wasn't that she didn't fit in because of her alien nature, no, Alex had seen all kinds of aliens here, but there was something different about Lyra. She seemed fragile, almost timid. It was clear to him that she wasn't like the other students. And though she wasn't part of the groups around her, it was also obvious that she didn't want to be. Alex had grown up on stories of intergalactic unity, of brave alliances formed between humans and alien species. But here, in the heart of this prestigious school, the reality felt different. The students might all be studying together, but it was clear that not all of them were as welcoming as the Academy's brochures had suggested. Lyra was living proof of that. As Alex continued his way down the hall, he saw the first signs of something troubling. Some of the alien students, much taller and stronger than her, walked past Lyra, throwing condescending looks in her direction. At first, it was subtle. A snicker here, a pointed comment there. Lyra didn't respond. She just stood there, her face unreadable, but Alex could tell that she was uncomfortable. This wasn't just a normal case of teasing. This was something cruel. Alex had been around bullies back on Earth, but he had never seen anything like this. These were students from the most powerful species in the galaxy, species who had mastered advanced technology and space travel long before humanity had even left Earth's atmosphere. Yet, here they were, using that power to intimidate someone weaker, someone who didn't have the same strength or presence that they did. And the worst part was, no one seemed to care. The more Alex watched, the more he realized something. Lyra wasn't just being ignored. She was being targeted. The bullying wasn't just about her alien nature, it was about her weakness, her quiet demeanor. It was the kind of bullying that went unnoticed by most, because it didn't come in the form of physical violence or harsh words. Instead, it was psychological, the way a predator would toy with its prey before moving in for the kill. They were isolating her, making her feel small, insignificant. Alex couldn't understand why this was happening. The academy was supposed to be a place of learning, a place where different species came together to create a better future for the galaxy. So why were they letting something like this happen? As Alex moved through the hallway, his mind raced. He couldn't understand why no one was stepping in to help her. Why was she left to suffer alone? As he continued to watch from the corner of his eye, he saw Lyra's shoulders tense, as if she could feel the judgment weighing on her. She looked down at the ground, trying to make herself invisible. And in that moment, Alex felt a sense of anger rise in his chest. He didn't know why, but he couldn't stand seeing this girl treated like this. Maybe it was the fact that she was an outsider, like him. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be an underdog. Or maybe it was simply because no one should have to face this kind of cruelty. But what could he do? He was just a human, a new student, trying to make his way in this strange world. Alex didn't have the power that the other students had. He wasn't rich with technology or strength like the alien students. But something inside him stirred. Something told him that this wasn't right. Lyra deserved better, and if no one else would stand up for her, maybe he could be the one to make a difference. As the bell rang to signal the beginning of classes, Alex made a decision. He didn't know exactly how, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just stand by and let this happen. The new school year had just begun, and so had his journey to change things for Lyra, and for himself. The question was, would anyone else stand with him? Over the next few weeks, things only got worse for Lyra. At first, the bullying was subtle, whispers behind her back, alien students making fun of her quiet nature, or just ignoring her altogether. But as time passed, the cruelty took on a new, much more sinister form. It wasn't just words anymore. It wasn't just ignoring her. The bullying had evolved into something far more dangerous, something that was harder to escape from. It all started when a group of powerful alien students began to target Lyra directly. These students were from one of the galaxy's most advanced species, known for their technological prowess. They could manipulate holograms, control artificial intelligence, and even alter virtual environments at will. To them, Lyra was nothing more than a fragile and vulnerable target, an easy way to flex their superior abilities. They saw her as weak, and they were determined to make her feel that way, to show her just how much more powerful they were. One day, as Lyra was walking to class, Alex saw the group approach her. It wasn't just the usual mocking or teasing. This time, the alien students were using their advanced technology to make her life a living nightmare. They had activated a virtual reality system that allowed them to manipulate her surroundings, turning the entire hallway into a maze of nightmarish images and sounds. Holographic projections filled the air, creating terrifying visions that made Lyra freeze in place. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air grew heavy with static, and the sound of whispering voices echoed in her ears. Alex watched, horrified, as Lyra stood trapped in this virtual nightmare. Her hands shook as she tried to push through the projections, but the more she struggled, the more the illusions intensified. It was as if the bullies were controlling the very environment around her, amplifying her fear, making her feel like she was suffocating. Alex's heart raced as he saw the cruelty in their actions. They weren't just bullying her anymore, they were using their power to break her down, to make her feel small and insignificant. The other students around them just watched. No one stepped in. No one even seemed to care. Alex could hear the laughter of the alien students as they tormented Lyra, their voices full of mockery. Some of the other students, those who weren't involved in the bullying, looked away, pretending they hadn't seen anything. It was as if this was just another normal part of academy life, something that didn't deserve any attention. Alex stood frozen, torn between wanting to do something and knowing he was powerless. What could he do? He wasn't like the other students, he didn't have their tech, their skills, or their strength. He wasn't even sure if he had the courage to confront the bullies. These were students from the most advanced species in the galaxy, and he was just a human, someone who had barely learned how to survive in a world that wasn't his own. But as he watched Lyra, her face pale with fear, something inside him began to change. The anger that had been building inside him ever since he first saw her being bullied started to burn brighter. He couldn't just watch this happen. He couldn't stand by while these bullies used their technology to hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Lyra might have been different, but that didn't make her any less of a person. She deserved respect, kindness, and the chance to live her life without fear. As the bullying continued, Alex's mind raced. He knew he wasn't strong enough to take on these students in a direct confrontation. They had weapons, tech, and abilities far beyond anything he had ever seen. But there had to be something he could do. He wasn't a fighter or a tech expert, but he was clever. He had to be. It was his only option. Suddenly, Alex had an idea. It wasn't much, but it was something. He remembered a small, outdated piece of technology he had brought with him from Earth, a cloaking device, old by galactic standards, but still functional. It wasn't as advanced as the tech the alien students used, but it could give him the element of surprise. If he could get close enough to disrupt their control over the virtual projections, maybe, just maybe, he could end this torment. It was a risky plan, and Alex wasn't sure it would work, but he couldn't just do nothing. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the scene unfold. Lyra was still trapped in the virtual nightmare, her eyes wide with terror as the projections became more distorted and overwhelming. The laughter of the bullies echoed in Alex's ears, and for the first time, he truly understood the weight of the injustice. These students weren't just bullying her, they were using their power to break her spirit. They were showing her that in this academy, there was no place for someone like her. It made Alex sick to his stomach. He knew he had to act now. There was no more time to waste. Stepping forward, Alex quietly activated his cloaking device, watching as his body disappeared from view. His heart raced as he moved quickly, silently toward the group of bullies. They were so caught up in their cruel game that they didn't even notice him approaching. The virtual projections continued to torment Lyra, who was too lost in the nightmare to notice anything around her. As Alex got closer, he could see the smug expressions on the bullies' faces. They were enjoying this, savoring every moment of her suffering. He felt a wave of disgust wash over him, but he pushed it aside. He had to focus. He crept up behind one of the bullies, his fingers brushing the control panel that was generating the projections. With a quick flick of his wrist, he disabled the system, causing the terrifying images to vanish. For a moment, everything went quiet. The virtual nightmare disappeared, and the hallway returned to normal. Lyra stood there, gasping for breath, her body trembling with relief. The bullies were too stunned to react immediately. But Alex knew they would figure out what happened soon enough. He had bought Lyra just a moment of peace, but it wouldn't last long. Alex stood, still hidden by the cloaking device, his mind racing. He didn't know what the bullies would do next, but he knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. He had taken the first step, but the real fight was just beginning. One afternoon, as Alex made his way to the Academy's central hub, he could feel a sense of unease settle over him. The past few days had been a blur of anxiety and frustration, watching Lyra suffer in silence. He had tried to help in small ways, deactivating the virtual projections, quietly offering support when he could, but it was never enough. Every day, it felt like the bullying got worse, and every day, it felt like no one was willing to step in. But today, something was different. As Alex entered the hallway leading to the Academy's tech lab, he heard the familiar sound of cruel laughter. The noise echoed down the corridor, and Alex's stomach turned. His heart began to race as he followed the sound, knowing all too well what it meant. This time, he wasn't going to stand by and watch. He reached the door to the virtual simulation room, where Lyra often spent time alone, and saw the group of alien students gathered outside. They were laughing, their voices filled with mockery. Alex's breath caught in his throat when he saw what they were doing. Lyra was trapped inside a high-tech simulation, and this time, it was far worse than anything he had seen before. The simulation wasn't just some harmless game or training exercise, it was a virtual prison, designed to force the user to relive their worst fears and most painful memories. Lyra was caught in the midst of it, her body trembling as she appeared to be caught in some sort of traumatic experience. Her hands were pressed against her head, and her face was twisted in agony. The holographic simulation had completely consumed her, showing her nightmares on loop. Alex could see it in her eyes, the hopelessness, the pain. The alien bullies stood outside the simulation, watching, laughing, and mocking her. "Look at her," one of them sneered. "She can't even handle a simple simulation. What's wrong with her?" Another laughed loudly, taunting Lyra, "Pathetic. You're not fit for this academy. Maybe you should just leave before we really show you what power is." Alex could feel the anger bubbling up inside him. It was like a switch had been flipped. These weren't just insults, they were tormenting her, using their power and tech to break her down, to make her feel worthless. The things they were saying weren't just cruel, they were designed to strip her of her dignity, to make her believe she was inferior. Inside the simulation, Lyra's emotional breakdown was evident. The trauma of whatever she was experiencing in the virtual world seemed to crush her spirit. Her body went limp, and she collapsed to the ground, her face pale with tears streaking down her cheeks. The alien students continued to laugh, their cruel words ringing in the air as they enjoyed her suffering. Alex could see it now, Lyra wasn't just being bullied for her quiet nature or her fragility. She was being broken, piece by piece, and they were enjoying every second of it. He couldn't take it anymore. Alex knew that if he didn't act now, he might lose his chance to make a difference. He was angry, no, he was furious. He had been letting the fear of retaliation control him, letting the thought of his own powerlessness stop him from doing what he knew was right. But now, watching Lyra crumble under the weight of their cruelty, something inside him snapped. He couldn't let this injustice continue. Not anymore. Alex stepped forward, his voice firm, though it trembled with anger. "Enough," he shouted, causing the alien students to freeze in surprise. They hadn't expected anyone to confront them, especially not a human. "Get out of the way, human," one of the students sneered. "This doesn't concern you." Alex didn't back down. He stepped closer to the door, his eyes locked on Lyra's image in the simulation. He couldn't let them keep doing this. He couldn't just stand by and pretend everything was fine when he knew what was happening wasn't right. His heart was pounding in his chest, but he didn't care. He had to stop this now. The bullies smirked and activated a control panel, threatening to turn up the simulation's intensity, but Alex was ready. He rushed forward and, with a quick flick of his hand, disrupted the system. The simulation paused for a moment, giving Lyra a brief respite. The group of students glared at him, their anger palpable. "You've gone too far," Alex said, his voice growing more confident. "This isn't a joke. You can't just break someone like this for fun." The alien students stared at him in disbelief. They weren't used to being confronted, especially not by someone like him, a human, someone they saw as inferior. But Alex didn't care about their superiority anymore. He didn't care that they were more powerful. He had seen enough. The time for standing by was over. One of the bullies, a tall alien with jagged metallic skin, stepped forward. "You think you can stop us?" he said, his voice dripping with venom. "Do you really think you can stand up to us, human? You're nothing." Alex stood his ground. "Maybe I'm nothing to you," he said. "But Lyra's not nothing. She's a person, and you're going to stop treating her like this. You want to break someone? Try breaking me." His words were brave, but deep down, Alex was terrified. He wasn't prepared for the retaliation that was sure to come. These alien students had power, tech, and resources that far surpassed anything he had. But he knew that if he didn't act, no one else would. The bullies were silent for a moment, weighing their options. They hadn't expected a human to stand up to them, let alone threaten to stop them. They had underestimated Alex. But that hesitation didn't last long. The tall alien with metallic skin sneered, activating another control panel, this time to launch a wave of virtual energy at Alex. Before the attack could reach him, Lyra's voice echoed from inside the simulation. She screamed, "Stop!" Alex's heart sank. It wasn't just for herself, she was crying out for him. In that moment, Lyra's vulnerability was clear, and Alex realized that the line between strength and weakness was not about power, but about standing up for what was right. He could do this. He had to. For Lyra. And as the tension built, Alex realized the true cost of standing up for someone else. It wasn't just about the risk, it was about knowing that sometimes doing the right thing meant risking everything. The tension in the air was thick, and Alex knew there was no turning back now. He had taken the first step by confronting the bullies, but the real challenge was still ahead of him. The alien students had power, advanced technology, and the ability to make his life miserable if they decided to retaliate. But Alex couldn't back down. Not anymore. Not after seeing what they had done to Lyra. She was no longer just a victim in his eyes, she was someone he had to protect, someone who deserved better. Alex could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the metallic-skinned bully advanced on him, a cruel sneer playing across his face. The bully's long claws tapped on the control panel, and Alex knew that the next move would likely be the one to determine everything. In that moment, Alex realized how outmatched he was. The bullies had tech that could do things beyond his understanding, sleek, high-tech devices capable of creating holographic illusions and virtual traps. But Alex wasn't powerless. He had one thing that they didn't. He had human ingenuity and resourcefulness. He wasn't armed with the same futuristic technology, but he had an outdated cloaking device, a relic from Earth, that he had carried with him when he first came to the Academy. It wasn't much by galactic standards, but in a situation like this, it might just be enough. The bullies were focused on him now. They had stopped trying to intimidate Lyra for a moment, their attention fully on the human who had dared to challenge them. Alex's mind raced. The cloaking device wasn't perfect, it had limitations, but it could make him invisible long enough to get close enough to disrupt their control over the simulation. He had no time to think through a detailed plan. His best chance was to act fast. As the bully with metallic skin reached for a weapon, Alex pressed a small button on the device hidden in his pocket. The world around him shimmered for a moment, and then he was gone. The cloaking device had activated, making Alex invisible. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had no time to waste. The group of alien bullies stood frozen for a moment, scanning the area around them, confused by the sudden disappearance. They started calling out to each other, their voices full of anger and frustration. "Where did he go?" one of them growled. "He couldn't have just vanished." Alex moved quickly, darting behind the nearest holographic projection. His heart was hammering in his chest, but he focused on staying quiet, keeping his breathing steady. He had to be careful not to make a sound. The bullies were dangerous when they were angry, and they had technology that could easily overwhelm him if they realized what he was doing. With the virtual projections still active, Alex crept up behind one of the bullies, the one controlling the simulation. He had to act quickly before they realized what was happening. Alex could see the small device in the bully's hand, a holographic control panel that was manipulating Lyra's nightmare. If he could get close enough to deactivate it, the whole simulation would collapse. The bullies were still scanning the area, oblivious to Alex's presence. Alex took a deep breath, then surged forward, using the last of his courage. He was a split second away from reaching the bully when suddenly, one of the others shouted, "There he is!" Alex turned just in time to see the other bully coming toward him, his arm outstretched, a weapon in hand. Alex's pulse quickened. This was it. He was running out of time. He needed to act fast. Using the element of surprise, Alex dove to the side, narrowly dodging the strike aimed at him. The cloaking device flickered for a brief moment, and for a split second, Alex was visible again. It was enough to confuse the bullies, but it also gave them a chance to react. He couldn't let that happen. In that brief moment of panic, Alex's mind raced, and he had an idea. The holographic environment was filled with artificial structures, buildings, walls, and barriers that existed purely in virtual space. He had an advantage here, something the bullies didn't expect. Quickly, he activated a secondary function on his cloaking device, something he had never tested before. The device sent out a short-range electromagnetic pulse, scrambling the virtual controls just long enough to disrupt the bully's system. For a moment, everything froze. The holographic world around them flickered, and the bullies' confused shouts filled the air. The projections they had been using to torment Lyra dissolved into thin air, leaving only the dull, quiet hallway behind them. It was like someone had pulled the plug on the entire simulation. Alex's heart raced, and the adrenaline coursing through his veins made him feel both terrified and exhilarated. Lyra, who had been frozen in place, suddenly collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The nightmare was over. The tormenting projections had vanished. Alex could see her relief in her eyes, but there was no time to waste. He couldn't let the bullies regain control of the situation. The bullies were scrambling now, their technology failing as the electromagnetic pulse interfered with their control panels. Alex could hear them shouting in frustration. "What did you do?" one of them screamed, slamming his fist into the ground. "You're going to regret this, human." Alex didn't wait to find out what they would do next. With the cloak still active, he darted behind a holographic wall, putting as much distance as he could between himself and the bullies. His mind was racing with thoughts of what would happen next, but there was one thing he knew for certain: he had disrupted their plan. He had stood up to them, even when it seemed impossible. For a moment, there was only silence. The bullies were still trying to regain control of the simulation, but Alex had bought Lyra some time. He had taken action, and the bullies knew that they couldn't just push him around anymore. But as the seconds ticked by, Alex realized that this was far from over. The bullies would be back. They would come after him. They would try to make him pay for what he had done. But for the first time since this had all started, Alex felt a surge of hope. He had taken a stand, and he had done what he knew was right. Even if it cost him everything, he wouldn't back down. Not when it meant protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. As the virtual world settled back into reality, Alex knew this was just the beginning. The confrontation had ended, but the real battle, the battle for justice, was only starting. The battle was over, but the aftermath was still sinking in for Alex. His heart was still racing, his mind buzzing with the adrenaline of what had just happened. He had done it. He had stood up to the bullies, disrupted their simulation, and helped Lyra escape their cruel torment. But despite his victory, he felt a quiet sense of uncertainty as he watched Lyra kneel on the floor, still gasping for breath, her fragile form shaking. Alex quickly moved to her side, the cloak flickering as he deactivated it, revealing himself in the open. Lyra looked up at him, her large, alien eyes wide with shock. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, both processing the intensity of the situation. Alex could see the vulnerability in her eyes, and for the first time, the barriers between them, species, background, and even language, seemed to melt away. "Are you okay?" Alex asked softly, his voice gentle as he knelt beside her. Lyra blinked, her lips trembling. It was clear she was overwhelmed, not just by the terror of the bullying, but by the sudden rush of emotions she didn't know how to process. She had never been helped before, not like this. Most of the time, she had been left alone to suffer in silence, her alien nature and shy personality making her an easy target. But Alex had changed that, stepping in when no one else would. I don't know what to say," Lyra whispered, her voice barely above a breath. Her words came out in a soft, shaky whisper, and Alex could tell she was still processing what had just happened. Her species, known for their intelligence and delicate physiology, had never been used to physical confrontation, let alone emotional outbursts. She had been bullied for so long, it seemed surreal to her that anyone would step in to defend her. "Hey," Alex said, his voice steady but warm. "You don't have to say anything. I couldn't let them do that to you. No one deserves to be treated like that." Lyra swallowed hard, tears welling up in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to fight them back, but it was no use. The weight of everything she had gone through, the torment, the isolation, had finally broken through. She wanted to thank him, but words failed her. She had never expected anyone, especially a human, to come to her aid. Her species was known for their cold, calculating minds, often shying away from emotional connections with others. But here, in this moment, she could feel something different. Something human. I don't know how to thank you," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. You saved me. But why? Why would you do that for someone like me?" Alex paused for a moment, considering her words. His hand hovered awkwardly in the air, unsure whether to reach out or not. It wasn't easy to express his feelings, but there was something inside him that needed to be said. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, no matter the odds, but the way Lyra had asked the question made him realize just how much this moment meant to her. "Because it was the right thing to do," Alex said simply. "You didn't deserve any of that, and I couldn't just stand by and watch it happen. No one should have to face bullying, no matter who they are or where they come from. And you don't have to face it alone anymore, okay?" Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a victim in the eyes of those around her. For the first time, someone had seen her as a person, as a fellow student, not an alien to be mocked and feared. Alex's words weren't just comforting, they were a lifeline. I don't know what to say," Lyra repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her hands, wringing them nervously, as though unsure how to accept this kindness. "I've never had anyone care before." Alex offered her a small, reassuring smile. He knew that what he was doing wasn't enough to erase all the pain she had endured. One act of kindness couldn't undo years of bullying. But he hoped it would be the beginning of something better for her. He hoped it would show her that not all humans were like the ones who had treated her with cruelty. There were others, like him, who would stand by her. "You don't have to say anything," Alex said softly. "But just know this, if they ever try anything again, I won't let them get away with it. Not while I'm around. You're not alone, okay?" Lyra nodded, her voice catching in her throat. "Thank you," she said, the words barely escaping. But Alex could hear the sincerity behind them. And that was enough. They sat there for a moment, the sounds of the academy bustling around them, but in that small corner of the school, the world seemed to fade away. The futuristic holograms that adorned the walls and ceilings seemed distant and irrelevant now. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was the quiet, unspoken bond between them. The warmth of human kindness transcended the technology and the barriers of species. It was a bond forged through compassion, one that Alex would never forget. "I don't know how to fit in here," Lyra admitted, her voice a little stronger now. "I don't know where I belong." Alex shook his head. "You belong with us. With everyone. You're not the only one who feels out of place here. We all have our struggles, but that doesn't mean we don't deserve to be here. Don't let them make you feel small. You're worth more than that." For the first time, Lyra's face softened into a smile. It wasn't much, but it was real. And in that moment, Alex realized something profound. Sometimes, the smallest gestures could make the biggest difference. He had risked everything to stand up for someone he barely knew, and in doing so, he had given Lyra something priceless, a sense of belonging. "I'll try," Lyra said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'll try to be stronger." Alex nodded. "And you won't be alone when you do." As they stood up together, ready to face whatever came next, Alex knew that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and the bullies would likely return, but they had made a choice. A choice to stand together. And that was something no technology or species could take away from them. In the days following the incident, the academy buzzed with talk of Alex's daring act. Word had spread quickly throughout the school. While some students were openly supportive, others were less enthusiastic, and the situation began to shift in ways Alex hadn't expected. His simple act of bravery had set off a chain reaction that no one, not even Alex, could have predicted. The first sign that things were changing came when a small group of alien students approached Alex in the school's common area. They were from various species, all with different backgrounds, but they shared something in common: admiration for what Alex had done. The tension that had hung in the air before seemed to dissipate as they stood together. "You know," said one of the students, a tall, silver-skinned alien with sharp features, "I've never seen anyone stand up to those bullies like that. You really showed them." Alex gave a modest shrug. "I couldn't just stand by. No one deserves to be treated that way." The silver-skinned student nodded. "You've got guts, human. More than most of us." Other students nodded in agreement, and a few even offered small smiles, which was rare in this highly competitive, multi-species environment. It felt like the start of a small but growing support network. For the first time since Alex had arrived at the academy, he didn't feel completely out of place. He had made an impact, and it felt good. But not everyone shared this sentiment. In a dark corner of the school's hallways, a different group of students gathered. These were the ones who had once mocked Lyra and who had been humiliated by Alex's actions. They were from powerful alien species known for their advanced technology, and their pride had been wounded. Their leader, a fierce-looking alien with large tusks and glowing red eyes, sneered as he heard about the reactions to the incident. "How dare he interfere," he growled, his voice like gravel. "A human. A weak, primitive human dares to disrupt our entertainment." His followers grumbled in agreement. They were used to being the top dogs on campus, and the idea of a human, someone from a species they viewed as less advanced, defying them was unacceptable. The bullies had been humiliated in front of the entire school, and they were determined to make Alex pay for it. But things were different now. Alex had sparked something, and the reactions weren't as one-sided as the bullies expected. "I don't know if we can just let this slide," one of the followers muttered. "I mean, we're superior, right? We can't just let him get away with this." Their leader, the one with the tusks, raised a hand, silencing the group. "We'll deal with him," he said coldly. "We'll make him regret interfering in our business. Let's see how brave he is when he's alone." They began to plot their retaliation, but Alex wasn't blind to what was happening. He knew that the bullies wouldn't stop simply because they had been embarrassed once. As he walked through the halls of the academy, he could feel their glares on him. The tension in the air was palpable, and Alex was starting to feel the weight of his actions. He had stood up for what was right, but now he was a target. A symbol of resistance in a school full of students who didn't always see eye to eye. Meanwhile, the school's administration began to take notice of the fallout. The headmaster, a highly intelligent and calculating alien, had received reports about the incident and was beginning to ask questions. He couldn't ignore the growing unrest among the student body, and he was especially concerned about the involvement of a human in an issue that had quickly become more complicated than he had anticipated. "We need to understand why this human felt compelled to intervene," the headmaster said to his council. "The other species here are used to their hierarchies. This Alex character, he has disrupted that. And now there are rumors of students following his lead. The council members, a mix of aliens from different races, exchanged uneasy glances. The headmaster, though respected, was concerned. In a galaxy ruled by powerful species, the idea of a human rising to challenge their ways didn't sit well with many. The school had been built to mold the future leaders of the galaxy, and it was not accustomed to students challenging its norms, especially not humans, whose technology was far behind that of the more dominant races. "We cannot allow this to continue," one of the council members, a sharp-eyed alien with smooth blue skin, said. "If we let one student challenge the status quo, it could lead to more. The balance of power could be at risk." Another council member, a towering figure with jagged armor-like skin, added, "Perhaps it's time to remind this human who he's dealing with." But despite the council's concerns, something began to shift in the academy. More and more students, particularly those who had grown tired of the bullying culture, started to speak up. They had watched Alex's bold actions, and now they were starting to question the system that allowed such cruelty to happen. Some began to see him not as a fool, but as a symbol of what could be. Alex wasn't alone anymore. Even Lyra, despite her earlier hesitation, began to speak out, sharing her story with others who had experienced similar mistreatment. Slowly, a quiet resistance began to form, students from all backgrounds and species coming together, fueled by Alex's actions and the belief that no one should be bullied, no matter their origin. As the tension continued to rise, it became clear that Alex's stand wasn't just about him anymore. It had become about something bigger, standing up against injustice, no matter the odds. In a school where species and technology often determined one's worth, Alex's bravery had sparked a movement that would force the academy to confront its own prejudices and the deeply ingrained power dynamics. But there was still one major question hanging in the air: would the administration back down? Would they punish Alex for his defiance? And if they did, would the student body let them? The tension was thick, and the consequences of Alex's actions were still unfolding. But one thing was certain: his decision to stand up had changed the course of the academy forever. The days after the confrontation were filled with a sense of quiet victory, but for Alex and Lyra, the journey was far from over. Though the bullying had stopped, the ripple effects of Alex's bold actions had caused a significant shift in the atmosphere at the academy. No longer was Lyra the shy, fearful girl hiding in the shadows. She was beginning to find her voice, to believe in herself, and it was all thanks to Alex's courage. At first, Lyra was cautious, unsure how to handle the newfound attention. She had lived her whole life as an outcast, and even though the bullying had stopped, it felt strange to walk through the school without looking over her shoulder. But Alex was there every step of the way. He would walk with her between classes, offer her encouragement, and, most importantly, make sure she knew she was no longer alone. Slowly, she started to open up. "You know," Lyra said one day as they sat together in a quiet corner of the academy's library, "I never thought anyone would care enough to stand up for me. Not like that." Alex smiled gently. "You matter, Lyra. Everyone does. No one should have to face that kind of treatment." Lyra looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for showing me that. I never knew humans could be so kind." Alex chuckled. "We're not all bad, you know. Sometimes we just need a little push to do the right thing." Lyra's confidence continued to grow each day, and with Alex's help, she started to engage more with other students. She had been so used to being ignored or mistreated, but now, more and more students, both human and alien, approached her, offering their friendship and support. It was as if Alex's actions had unlocked a door, allowing others to see Lyra for who she really was, a kind and intelligent person, deserving of respect and kindness. Meanwhile, the alien students who had once tormented Lyra were not forgotten. They had been humiliated, yes, but their actions couldn't be erased so easily. The group of bullies, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves isolated. The other students, those who had been too afraid or indifferent before, began to speak out against them. It wasn't just about Lyra anymore, it was about standing up for what was right. A growing number of students, including members of Lyra's own species, began to confront the bullies, demanding accountability for their actions. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents, this was a full-scale stand against the culture of cruelty that had plagued the academy for so long. The bullies found themselves at the center of a storm, facing the very students they had once belittled. The students, human and alien alike, united against them, refusing to tolerate their behavior any longer. The school administration, which had initially turned a blind eye to the bullying, could no longer ignore the pressure from the student body. The headmaster, who had been reluctant to take action, found himself faced with a difficult decision. The backlash was too loud to ignore, and the students' demand for change was undeniable. It became clear that the old ways could no longer stand. After an emergency meeting, the school announced new, stricter anti-bullying policies, and it wasn't long before the bullies who had harassed Lyra were expelled. It was a bittersweet victory, because while they had been removed from the academy, it also meant that they would never face the consequences of their actions directly. Still, it was a powerful symbol. The institution was finally taking a stand against the toxic culture that had been allowed to fester for so long. The change at the academy was palpable. It wasn't just about punishing the bullies anymore, it was about ensuring that this kind of behavior would never be tolerated again. Lyra, once a victim of bullying, had become a symbol of strength. Alex, the human who had stood up for her, had become a hero in the eyes of many. Together, they had sparked a movement, and their courage had inspired others to stand up for what was right, no matter their species or background. In the final moments of the story, we see Alex and Lyra standing side by side. It's the day of a big school event, one of the most important in the academy's calendar. And Lyra is set to participate. She's nervous, unsure if she's ready, but Alex is there to help her prepare. As he helps her with the final touches, his presence is a reminder of how far she's come. "You've got this, Lyra," Alex says softly, adjusting the straps on her outfit. "You've worked hard for this moment. You belong here, just like everyone else." Lyra smiles, her confidence now solid. "I couldn't have done it without you, Alex. You've been more of a friend than I ever thought possible." Together, they walk into the main hall of the academy, a symbol of how much they've grown. The other students look on, some in awe, others in quiet admiration. The once quiet girl who had been the target of bullying now walks proudly by the side of the human who had changed everything for her. The final scene unfolds like a cinematic moment. Alex and Lyra, no longer bound by fear or isolation, step into the spotlight. Their connection, human and alien, compassion and bravery, shines brightly in the face of a galaxy that once sought to divide them. And in that moment, it becomes clear, the true strength of humanity lies not in its advanced technology or its military might, but in its ability to rise above fear and injustice, to stand up for what's right even when it's the hardest thing to do. As they walk side by side, a sense of peace settles over the academy. It's a new beginning, one where compassion triumphs over cruelty, and where the human spirit, when united with others, proves to be a force that can change the galaxy.